Okay, let us first say the prayer that we always do, and then we'll begin the session. We all can close the eyes, sit with the spine erect, and face relaxed. We'll chant 3 Omkars and Sahana Vavatu. Oh. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sah Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Open your eyes. Okay. Hi and welcome everyone. This is our 9th session of Yogaarthi today. As most of you know, and a few of you are new, we started this initiative Yogaarthi in January 2022. So this is an initiative by Koham School of Yoga, where we try to organize a session every month, and we call a guest speaker. And most of these sessions, rather all of these sessions are basically focused on Indic wisdom, yoga, Indian philosophy, some scriptures, and also the application of yoga in day-to-day life. So we try to explore the therapeutic aspect of yoga, the spiritual aspect of yoga, the root, the connections of the yoga to the broader spectrum of Indian philosophy, Bharatiya Tattvajnan, Darshan Shastra, and so on. So I'm very happy today that we have Anand Gowande with us. So welcome, Anand, to this forum, Yogaarthi forum. Yes. I am especially happy because I know Anand for quite a few years, and before actually getting introduced, rather reintroduced with each other because of Indic wisdom, that I think we share this as a common interest. We both of us have done a lot of treks in Sahyadri together, and that was about 10-12 years back, and so that is how I know him, and then now we have been reintroduced to each other in this context. So Anand Gowande, he has IT background, so he has worked in the field of information technology for over more than a decade, and then he left his job to pursue his interest and passion into this field of Indology. So he got a master's degree in Indology, and after that he's working with some institutes as a faculty, and he teaches his subject of interest, which is Vedic people, Vedic times, ancient Indian history, art and architecture. He also accompanies some study tours or ancient trails where people visit these ancient places, and he also guides them as an expert in art and architecture. So he's going to talk to us about Aryan Invasion I'm sure most of us have heard about Aryan invasion, Aryan migration, and we have certain ideas about it. So Anand is going to talk about it, whether it is a myth or reality. So welcome again, Anand, and you can start. Thank you.
Thank you, Suchita. Thank you, Suchita, and thank you all of you for joining this session. Uh, Aryan invasion, myth or reality? This is a subject in itself, which is very difficult to cover in a session as such. But I will try to touch upon most of the key points that will help us understand what this Aryan invasion is all about. What is the origin of this Aryan invasion theory? Who propagated it, what were the possible motives behind it, and what are the facts or what are the findings that we get from different sources when we study history, be it literary sources like Vedic literature, be it archaeological sources or archaeological excavations that have been done so far. And we will try to put some chronology together to understand the timeline and geography of this overall Aryan invasion or Aryan migration theory and how it is taking shape over the years. So I'll just share my screen. I have a set of slides which I will be sharing just for your reference. So let me know if you all can see the slides. Is it visible? Okay, thank you. Okay, so first of all, how many of you have heard about Aryan invasion theory? Most of you, right? Or at least the word Aryan, correct? Uh, this is the most talked about subject in the world history, I believe. And Aryan invasion theory is the most discussed or debated or hotly debated topic in the history of the world, particularly in Indian context. So when we talk about Aryan invasion, the theory or the name itself suggests that Aryan were a set of people who invaded some part, and in this case, it is India who invaded India. Obviously, they came from somewhere outside. They invaded us. They established or overpowered the indigenous people, and they established their own culture here, which we are carrying till date. So that is the framework of Aryan invasion theory. And there are various motives attributed to Aryan invasion theory, why this theory might have come up. Because as we study or as the new revelations are made in the field of archaeology, or we study or we deeply analyze our scripts of Rig Veda and other Vedic literature, slowly all the experts have started believing that there is something wrong with this theory, but still there are debates going on. And then people started thinking about what was the motive and how this theory came into picture. So let's first understand how Aryan invasion theory or the term Aryan invasion was coined in first place. So just to take you back, John Marshall was the Director General of ASI, and he excavated Mohenjo-daro and Hadappa in 1920-1921. Most of us have heard about this in our school syllabus. And Mohenjo-daro, Hadappa at that time were the most ancient or the oldest civilization known in Indian subcontinent. However, when John Marshall or the excavation team found out that Mohenjo-daro was a very well planned, very well organized city, and also Hadappa and few other sites, they were quite surprised because Westerners always believed that, or Western experts always believed that India was always an underdeveloped or uncivilized country, uncivilized population, and we were not known to have such a sophisticated architecture, or nobody believed it. So John Marshall initially thought that it is an Indo-Sumerian culture and Indo-Sumerian cities. But later on, within 3-4 years, when more and more sites were discovered, he dropped this idea. So this is the point from which the concept of Arya or Aryans really started taking the center stage. Before this, in 17th century, 18th century, nobody spoke about Aryans. Nobody knew, or rather people knew, but nobody gave any credence or importance to this word Arya. But in as soon as this Mohenjo-daro and Hadappa excavations happened, that is where this Aryan invasion, Aryan migration, all these things started coming up, and they were linked to India. We will see in detail what is Arya, how the Aryan invasion theory was propagated, and what are the key aspects of this theory, etc. But just going back, so there was an Indian scholar, Ram Prakash Chanda. Obviously, when Mohenjo-daro and Hadappa were excavated, he compared the excavated sites with the descriptions that we find in Rigveda. Rigveda is the ancient script of Indian civilization, Hindu civilization that we know. And he concluded, and that was purely a scholarly study, academic study without any motivation. We can believe that. And he concluded that the civilization at prima facie, it looks that the civilization in Mohenjo-daro, Hadappa, or in mentioned in Rigveda is different. In 1944, Mortimer, Director General of ASI, and he was the first person who used this Ram Prakash Chanda's conclusions, and he combined them with some of the kathas or stories in Rigveda to coin the term of Aryan invasion. There is a story in Rigveda which mentions that Indra, the supreme deity of Aryans, he defeated Shabaras and destroyed their 100 cities, and that helped Aryans to establish their supremacy, or uh, help the water required for civilization or their establishments. Mortimer Wheeler picked this up, the term Purandar, Purav in a sense cities, the one who destroyed the cities, that is Purandar, that is Indra. He picked up this term and combined it with Ram Prakash Chanda's conclusions and put forward a theory which is popularly known as Aryan invasion theory. The theory says Aryans were not indigenous people. They came from outside, from Central Europe or Eastern USSR. They defeated the indigenous people. Indra was their leader. They destroyed the cities here, and they established their own culture. And since Mohenjo-daro Hadappa was being excavated, obviously most of the scholars started linking this particular theory to the excavations of Mohenjo-daro and Hadappa, and then started putting forward a theory that Mohenjo-daro and Hadappa was a civilization, a developed civilization of indigenous people, and Aryans were barbarian tribes, pastoral tribes from Central Europe. They invaded India. They destroyed this civilization, and that's how Mohenjo-daro, Hadappa, or all this Hadappa civilization came to an end, and Vedic Dharma or Vedic culture was established in India. Now, once this theory was put forward by Mortimer Wheeler, it became a practice, or it became a norm for all the Indologists, be it Western or Indian Indologists, unfortunately most of the Indian Indologists also, to discover facts or to manufacture facts which will support this particular hypothesis. So they started selectively interpreting Rigveda and started picking up verses from here and there, and then interpreting them to suggest that there was a conflict between indigenous people and Aryans. just like Asuras, Dasyus, Shishnadevas, all these terms used in Rigveda, and their sporadic battles with some Aryan kings. They used it to create a picture that as though Aryan civilization or Aryan race was in conflict or in war with the Dravidian race or the Mool Nivasis, and that's how this invasion was taking place. And as I mentioned, Aryans were identified as barbarians, tribes, invaders, while the Mool Nivasi or indigenous people were identified as cultured, civilized, who could build cities like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, etc. And this theory started making headlines in the academic circles. Unfortunately, most of the scholars then, without really putting it to test, uh, either accepted it or kept mum on this theory. If you really want to understand this, I mean, the irony is, if Aryans came from Central Europe, and we will see in next slides, Aryans did not only come to India. Those tribes also went to Iran. They went to Georgia. They went to Italy, Greece, Turkey. But in none of these countries, Aryan invasion term was used. So Germans, are they Germans today, or they are somebody, or is it a civilization which was founded by Aryans? Nobody talks about it. Or there is no difference like Mool Nivasi German and Aryan German. Same is the case with Italy. Same is the case with Iran. Same is the case with everywhere in the world except India. And that suggests that in India this particular term was coined with a motive. What was the motive? We all know Britishers always wanted to prove that Indians could never rule themselves. India was not a civilized country. India was not a developed culture. And it is the Britishers who brought the political system, the culture, and the related aspects to India, right? So obviously, to inflict a sense of inferiority, this particular theory was always used, and even unfortunately this was used even after independence of India, even till recently. Now when all this was happening, as I said, unfortunately Indian scholars also did not scrutinize this. Rather, Indian Indologists spent their time in discovering facts and putting the facts in the same framework or fitting the facts in the same framework. The only person who actually went through the Rigveda or its scripts in detail and refuted this theory in 40s or in 50s was Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. He was the only person who, without any doubt, proclaimed that there was no invasion, whether it is Aryas or Dravid, whatever you call it, all these are indigenous people. And as propagated by British and so-called scholars, Western India scholars, this caste system and other evils in Indian society are not because of Aryan invasion. There is no Aryan. There was no evidence. There is no evidence of Aryan invasion in Rigveda, in archaeology whatsoever. But he was the lone voice, and we know. I mean, he was working in different areas of social and political fields. So obviously, his voice was not taken that seriously, or maybe with not that much of credence in in the academic field. And apart from him, nobody else really contested this. So let's understand what is the term Arya. So in Rigveda, Arya means a noble person, a person with high moral value who has high standards. And in the academic field, if you talk purely from the academic field, Arya term was first used for a language family. So in 17th and 18th century, people started studying languages across the continents to find out if we can understand the culture, if we can understand the chronology of development of languages, uh, and subsequently they found out that most of the languages that are spoken in Europe and in Indian subcontinent till India have some similarities. And then scholars started believing that all these languages must have been originated from one single family. Initially, they named it as Indo-Aryan family. That is the first time this Aryan word was used. It was used for a language family, not for a race. Second, after World War II, we know the word Arya itself had got a different meaning because of the atrocities that German Nazi forces unleashed on Jews and other communities, and Hitler's proclamation that he is a proud Aryan or Aryan race. The term Aryan itself took a different meaning, and that is where scholars started calling this as Indo-European language family, and the Indo-Aryan language family term or Indo-Aryan term was kept aside. So Indo-European language family, as you can see, has different set of languages. We have Indo-Iranian, which further splits into Indic, Sanskrit, and Iranian. Then we have Anatolian, Tokharian, Albanian, Hellenistic, Italic, Germanic. All these language families, when they were studied, scholars came to conclusion that till 3500 BC, before Christ, all these people speaking all these 12 different dialects must be staying or were staying in one common place. They had one single origin. And then what was that single origin? Scholars conveniently, I call it conveniently, assume that origin to be Central Europe or Eastern USSR, or sorry, Western USSR, Eastern Europe. Why conveniently? Because there is no evidence. Language will never tell you where they were staying. Language might give you some pointers which will help you determine whether they were staying together or not, like common words used in the language for certain common terms, phrases, etc. But language can never tell you the geography as such, unless there is a literature available which talks about or which describes the geography. And there is no literature available in Indo-Iranian languages, the root language, right? So it was conveniently that their origin was Central Europe, and from there, around 2000 BC, these groups started splitting and they started migrating to different parts of the European or Asian subcontinent, Asian continents. So when this happened, when they started happening, around 1500 BC, so from here they started. So from here they started, and till 1500 BC, they reached somewhere here. The Indo-Iranian family, they reached to this point. So Germans went maybe northwest, Italians went northwest, some other people went to north, some went to east, and Indo-Iranians traveled all this distance and came to the borders of Iran and Afghanistan around 2000 BC. And from there, they were again split, and one group entered India, which is called as Indo-Aryans, which, according to experts or the proponents of Aryan invasion migration theories, they actually composed Rigveda after reaching India and established the Vedic culture. And the other group went to Iran, the Indo-Iranians, and there they composed Avesta, and we know Avesta and Rigveda or Avesta and Vedic literature have lot of things in common. So that is how this split has happened, and that is where all this chronology or all this route was proposed or established or was propagated. Now the question is, why 1500 BC? Why 3000 BC? Why 2000 BC? So there are different explanations. Different experts try to give different explanations for this. And one of the explanation is there was an attempt to fit the world history within biblical timelines, and that is why all these things were all these timelines were defined. But that is not today's topic, so I'll not get into that, or I'll not go into the details of that. Let's focus on this migration part. So once this Aryan invasion theory or Aryan invasion theory was put forward, and the timeline of 1500 BC of arrival of Aryans into India and composition of Rigveda was agreed, then came the first blow to this theory. And this blow came with solid evidence of archaeological evidence, which was found in Bogas Koi, which is in Syria today. And an inscription was found in Bogas Koi somewhere here. That inscription was an agreement or a truce between Mittani kingdoms or Mittani kings and other kingdom, which was Hittites. So Mittanis were ruling in Syria and Turkestan, in today's Syria and Turkestan. And it is well established that Mittani kingdom was formed 1500 years before Christ. And this inscription is dated to 1380 years before Christ. And what is so important about this inscription? This inscription mentions Rigvedic deities Indra, Varuna, Mitra, Nasatya, and Ashwini Kumara. And these deities are proclaimed or are mentioned as the guardians of that particular agreement, or somebody or they were this that particular agreement was attributed to them, right? Now another important or interesting aspect is all these deities are Rigvedic deities. They are not Avestan deities. We saw that Indo-Iranian split, and then Aryans came to India, they composed Rigved, and the other part went to Iran, they composed Avesta. So all these deities are Rigvedic deities. That means they clearly have Indo-Aryan influence. So that clearly establishes that Mittani kingdom was Indo-Aryan, and there was no influence of Indo-Iranian. Now the question is, if we agree that 2000 split and one group traveled here and they entered India, and after that they composed Rigveda, how can Rigvedic deities be referred in the exactly opposite direction in Syria and Turkmenistan region in the same time frame of 1500? And that is where the first blow was given to the Aryan invasion theory. Now I've just tried to put the same thing in some a graphical form here. So 3000, 3500 BC, all these groups were together. 2000 BC, they split into Indo-Aryan group and Indo-Iranian group. One group comes to Afghanistan, Iran region, composes Avesta. Now this Indo-Aryan group, if we assume that they again split into two, one came to India and one went to Mittani. Then the second hypothesis that was put forward in Aryan invasion theory, that they came to India and then they composed Rigveda, falls flat. Because if that is so, how Mittanis knew about Rigveda or Rigvedic deities? Then third thing is, if let's say these people came to India, they composed Rigveda, and some of them again traveled back to Mittanis or Syria, then this travel itself will take 200, 300 years. Which means Mittani kingdom, if it was established in 1500 BC, at least 300 years before that, people must have started from India. At least 200 years before that, Rigveda must have been composed and culture must have been established. So all the timelines of 1500 BC, 1200 BC were falling flat, and Aryan invasion theory was falling flat. So to overcome this issue, as well as there are other issues within the Rigveda itself. Now Rigveda, we know Rigveda, now it is established that Rigveda has 10 mandals, out of which 5 mandals were composed in the first phase. Then we have 4 mandals, and then we have last 2 mandals, mandal 1 and 10. And it is believed that Avesta is contemporary or even after the Mandal 10 of Rigveda, or even after that, after Atharva Veda, which is even later period. Now, if Aryans came in a bunch in 1500 BC, why is the difference? Why is there a difference, or why are there different time frames for composition of Rigveda? That is another problem that had to be answered. And that's where the same set of people started propagating another theory, which is Aryan migration theory. Now, there were archaeologists also which were refuting Aryan invasion theory. For example, Kenneth, who was an anthropologist, Manav Vansha Shastrajna anthropologist, he studied the skeletons in Mohenjo-daro, and he established that there was no signs of war or injuries. Rather, these people died because of suffocation. So that was another blow to Aryan invasion theory. The third thing was Rafiq Mughal and Amalananda Ghosh. Rafiq Mughal was from Pakistan, today's Pakistan, and Amalananda Ghosh from India. They studied pre-Harappan establishments and Harappan establishments. So Harappa culture or Sindhu Saraswati culture is divided into 3 parts: early Harappa, mature Harappa, and late Harappa. So when I say pre-Harappa, it is even before early Harappa, which is 7,000 years BC, before Christ, to 3,000 years or 2,000 years BC. To 4,000 years BC. So they studied this and they established that pre-Harappa and Harappa were continuous civilization, which gave another blow to the theory that somebody came in and they destroyed the culture here, established their own culture, etc. So there is a cultural continuity that was established by Rafiq Mughal and Amalananda Ghosh. And since all these things were happening, and more sites were getting discovered in the basin of Sindhu and Saraswati, uh, people or the same group of scholars, Western scholars mostly, they started proposing another theory, which is migration theory. The migration theory states that sometime, somewhere 8000 BC, pastoral tribes in Central Europe started migrating towards India. And that kept happening in bunches over the period of time. And the last one to arrive was in 1500 BC. Now, even if we assume this, then it directly contradicts the language family, its split, and then arrival into India. And it does not answer the question of how Rigvedan deities were referred in Mittani, which was 1500 years before Christ. But still, the scholars insisted that this is the migration and not the invasion. And due to their migration, due to the inflows that were happening from the northwestern part of India, the indigenous people moved down to south, which are Dravida people. So the basic premise of earlier theory was just kept as it is. Only thing is, just because there was no evidence of invasion, they replaced the word invasion with migration. There is no change. It's same as old wine in new bottle. No change. Right? And By the way, this word Dravid also is a language family word. It's not a race. It's not like the one that is used in Tamil Nadu politics today. It is not a race. When people identified Indo-Aryan set of languages, the languages mostly spoken in northern part of India, they proposed that there are 6 different families of languages in India, and one of them is Indo or Dravida family, not Indo-Dravid, Dravida family. And this Dravid family is nothing but people in the South Indian part of the peninsula. And that's how the word Dravid came into picture. So this is how the Aryan migration theory came into picture. But still, as we discussed, Aryan invasion theory and migration theory, the questions were still the same. And rather, people started studying more deeply the Vedic literature, and more questions started surfacing out of it. For example, if Rigveda was composed 1500 BC and Mohenjo-daro Harappa or Harappa civilization ended in 1500 BC, and those two civilizations, Aryan as well as Mohenjo-daro Harappa, were coexisting for some time in the same region of Sapta Sindhu, then Rigveda or Vedic literature must have some memories or mentions of these Harappan cities, culture, civilization, or at least some conflicts as proposed by the scholars, Western scholars. There is no such mention, there are no such memories found in Vedic literature. Rather, Vedic literature suggests that from eternity, people of Vedic culture was prevailing in the same region. Second thing is Vedic literature does not even support Arya, Das, Dravida differences. There is no word like Dravida in Vedic literature. Das is used, but that is used in a very different context we will see later. Names of rivers, animals, etc. mentioned in Vedic literature are pure Aryan origin. So if you go to US, European people went to US, they established or they wiped out the indigenous tribes, established their own culture. But if you see their rivers, Mississippi, that is still a tribal name, right? But in India, you don't find this. All the names of rivers, etc., are purely Aryan origin, even in South to some extent, or rather mostly. There are no archaeological. So Aryans traveled from Central Europe to India. So they must have, for thousands of years or hundreds of years they traveled. They must have stayed at some place. So there is no archaeological evidence whatsoever on any route that is discovered so far. Mittani inscription, of course, poses a big question that we saw. And then came the DNA study that happened recently. There is a site called Rakhigadi in India, which is supposed to be the biggest city in Sindhu Saraswati or Harappa civilization excavated so far. And scientists were able to excavate or extract DNAs from the skeletons that were discovered. And when these skeletons, when these DNAs were studied, and this study was conducted under the leadership of Professor Vasanta Shinde from Deccan College, Pune, Vagish Narasimhan, and David Rage from Harvard Medical School. When this was studied, Dr. Vasant Shinde put forward his conclusion saying that there are no traces of Iranian farmers or steppe pastoralist ancestry, which means that there are no DNA traces of these tribal people from Central Europe that people were talking about so far. Second, the genetic pool of Rakhi Gadi extracted from Rakhi Gadi is identical to that of all the Indian families or Indian genetic pool that we find. So samples are collected from, I think, different population samples, and that was studied or compared. And then Vasanta Shinde goes on to claim that this study purely refutes Aryan invasion and migration theories. Now, David Rage who led the DNA study from Harvard Medical School, he agrees to first 2 points, but he refuses to comment on this simply because he says that this Aryan invasion, migration, etc., are in the domain of archaeology, not in the domain of DNA studies, and that is why he refuses to comment on this. But he is not refusing the theory, right? So this is another thing, and the last one that happened in 2014. All of you must have heard about this documentary on Discovery Plus about Sanoli in Haryana, where excavations were done, and you know chariots were excavated. 3 chariots with spoked wheels were discovered. Now, when all these Aryan invasion theories and discussions were happening, some of the proponents of Aryan invasion theory always point one point, that in Rigveda or in Vedic literature, horse was the most important animal, Ashwa. But in Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, or any other Sindhu Saraswati civilization site like Rakhi-Gadi, Kalibangan, etc., remains of horse or remains of chariots were never found. And a famous sentence that was used was, no Aryans, no horses, no Aryans, no chariots, no Aryans. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yes,
Sacheta?
very much, very much.
Yeah, okay. I saw somebody mentioning in chat that they're not able to hear.
No,
Okay.
no, we can hear you, sir.
Yeah. So even that was blown up by the discovery of chariots in Sanoli. But still, people or archaeologists are trying to put this Sanoli excavation results also within that same 1500 time frame for whatever reason. And Indian archaeologists, by the way. So let's understand few terms which will further help us understand why this Aryan invasion or migration theory was just a story cooked by somebody or some people. One of the basic premise of this was Aryans came into India, they attacked, which was refuted by archaeological finds and anthropological studies. Other was Aryans came into India 1500 BC, which was questioned by Mitanni inscriptions and lot of other literary evidences, etc. Third aspect was Aryans came here, they fought with the local people termed as Dasyas or Dasyus or Asuras, etc. in Rigveda. And that is the evidence that there was a conflict, there was an invasion. Now the term Das or Dasyu in Rigveda, literal meaning of it is dark skin. Or another term used for them is Krishna Garbha. So the meaning of Krishna Garbha, when it was interpreted by Niruktakars, who give the explanation of words or verses used in Vedic literature. They interpret Krishna Garbha as somebody who do not believe in Aryan way, Vedic rituals, or who are the followers of darkness, who has Krishna vritti in their Garbha, in their heart. So those are people who are not Vedics. Those are not people who are with dark skin and some indigenous people who are similar to current South Indian population, as mentioned by these Aryan invasion theory and AMT theorists. Second thing, there are mentions in Rigveda where Indra converts dasas or dasyus to Aryas. So if dasa was a term which was of physical nature, nobody could have converted them to Arya, which were exactly opposite, Gauravarna, etc. So the very mention that Indra convert dasas or dasyus to Aryas or bring them back to Arya fold, that itself proves that this was not a racial term. Third is, there is a famous war, Dasharatnya Yuddha, Bharata war mentioned in Rigveda. In this war, Aryas and Dasyus fought together in coalition in opposition to King Sudasa, who was a Aryan. So that proves Aryan and Dasyus were not enemies, rather they were together in many of the wars which were fought. So some scholars even claim that Aryans won over some of the tribes and local people and assigned them the status of Dasyus or Dasas, which are literally meaning is Gulam. Uh, and then these Das and Dasyus were incorporated in the fourth Varna, which is Shudra. But there is no evidence in Rigveda whatsoever which indicates this also. And as we saw, Dravida is also a word used for language and it is not a racial word. So this whole theory of Arya and Dasa getting in conflict, Arya and Dravidas getting in conflict has no basis either in Rigveda or in any other literature. So now how do we decide whether Aryans came to India or not? Who will answer this? And the answer should be found or answer was found within the Rigvedic text itself. When people started or scholars started studying Rigveda, first thing they realized is the geographical location of this Vedic culture in the ancient Rigvedic mandalas, the mandalas which were composed in the first phase of Rigveda, mentions these rivers or around these rivers Saraswati, Sindhu, Purushni, which is Ravi, Asikni, Chenab, Shatudri, Satluj, Vitasta, Jhelum, and Vipasha, Bias. So we heard about all these seven rivers Sapta Sindhu in our school days. So this is where this Vedic civilization was flourishing. And there is no memory, no mention of these people coming from somewhere else in Rigveda. Second is the center point or the focal point of this was river Saraswati, which is not existing today. And that was another point which people kept praising. See, it talks about Saraswati. There is no river called as Saraswati in India. So, which means this is a alien culture, Vedic culture. But this Saraswati is very, very important river. It is praised in multiple mandalas, multiple suktas. It is called as Ambitame, Naditame, Devitame, which means most important or most powerful river or the greatest of rivers. And there are mentions about its tributaries, Drushadvati, etc., as well as some of the places which were around Saraswati. And it is clearly evident from Rigveda and Vedic literature that Saraswati was the focal point around which this Vedic culture was flourishing. Then, which is this Saraswati? And then when the geological studies were done, when by different groups, by IIT and other groups, they identified remains of a river in the desert of Rajasthan and which continued up to the Kutch. And then, depending on the location of this particular river and then its tributaries, it was identified that this must have been Saraswati. And today, there are two small rivers, or one small river rather, which is Ghaggar Hakra. And that river was nothing but the Saraswati river, but in the Vedic period, it must have been a very powerful, huge river which was flowing through or which was the center point of this particular civilization, Vedic civilization. Then this when this discovery was made or when these things were being identified, proponents of Aryan invasion and migration theories, they have realized that, if it is established that Saraswati is nothing but Ghaggar Hakra, that will mean that Vedic civilization was formed or was flourishing on this very land and there was no migration. And that's where they started propagating another theory that this particular Ghaggar Hakra is not Saraswati, but there is another river in Afghanistan called as Helmand River, which is, and that river is nothing but Saraswati. And Aryans were coming from Central Europe to India. They stayed on the banks of this river Saraswati in Afghanistan, which is Harakvaiti, and that is where they composed Rigveda. That is third theory that came forward. But if we closely observe the rivers that are mentioned in Rigveda, there is a famous sukta called as Nadi Sukta in 10th mandala of Rigveda, which mentions rivers from Ganga till Sindhu and even beyond that. And all the scholars agree that these rivers are mentioned in their order from east to west. So Ganga, Yamuna, Drushadvati, Saraswati, etc. Shutudri, Vipasha, Purushni. So these way, in this sequence, these rivers were mentioned. So obviously, Saraswati was mentioned between Shutudri and Yamuna. Drushadvati is a tributary; it is not mentioned. This is Yamuna, and this is Shutudri, Satluj. And Saraswati was mentioned between these two. That confirms the location of Saraswati and confirms it to be Gaggarakra. Point number one. Second is Harakvati, which is called as the Saraswati by these scholars, so-called scholars. There is no other evidence apart from this one word Harakvati, which comes in Avesta. And we saw Avesta was composed or is contemporary of 10th mandala of Rigveda, which is the last mandala, or even after that, or contemporary to Atharva Veda, which is last of the Vedas. Which means, and Saraswati is mentioned in Mandala 2, which was the oldest of Mandala in Rigveda, which clearly shows that Saraswati cannot be Harakvaiti. That is not possible. So that is another evidence that we find in Rigveda. The same thing that we discussed. Third thing is, it is now geologically well established that Yamuna was tributary to Saraswati. And due to an earthquake, Yamuna changed its direction. Instead of flowing westward like this, it started flowing eastward and then became a tributary or met Ganga. And that is how Ganga became the bigger river and Saraswati started drying out. Ghaggar Hakra started drying. It is geologically proved. There are evidences to the effect of this. And also, our Indian culture or tradition knows for long that this Saraswati river was a dying river. So we have mentions of this Saraswati river in Mahabharata, in Vanaparva, where Saraswati, Drishadvati, Ilaya, etc. are mentioned. So obviously Mahabharata must have taken place in this region. Everybody knows most of the places mentioned in Mahabharata are in Sapta Sindhu region and not in Afghanistan. Second, Panchavinsha Brahman, which is a Brahman Grantha. First comes Vedas, then Brahman Granthas. So Panchavinsha Brahman, which is older than Mahabharata, it mentions that Saraswati is drying out. Then in Mahabharata, when Balaram goes on pilgrimage, he comes back and he narrates his experiences, and he says that Saraswati is dying, and it has converted into a set of rivers, a set of lakes. In Bhagavata Purana, it is mentioned that Saraswati has dried till Kurukshetra. So our Indian tradition knew this for thousands of years or hundreds of years, that Saraswati was a dying river, and which is proved by geological fact also. So which proves that Saraswati was nothing but this Ghaggar Hakra, which is small river existing today. It was a big river. It was a central river around which the Vedic culture was flourishing or was established. And that further proves that Aryans did not come from outside. Now there is another evidence in Rigveda, which is Dasharatnya Yuddha, where Raja Sudas of Puru dynasty, he fights with 10 different kings or coalition of 10 kings. Now this Raja Sudas, his ancestors, they established Agni in on the banks of river Saraswati, somewhere between Saraswati and Drishadvati, at a place called as Ilaspad, which is identified in Haryana today. And Sudas was many generations after this was the king Devavat who established this Agni. So it was the ancient place of Sudasa. Sudasa crossed over Purushni, which is Ravi, and fought with 10 kings here. And he defeated those 10 kings. And then Taittiriya Brahmana mentions that Agni was so unhappy with these people that he actually drove them out and they went westward. And there is ample evidence, or there is ample uh, 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 space to believe that these are the people who actually went to West Asia and established the cultures like Mittani cultures. So these were same people. Some of them were Aryans, but some of them were Dasyus, and the war was purely to expand the kingdom of Sudasa. So war was fought between Aryans and Aryans, not with Dasyus. Second, it was to expand the kingdom. Third, he went westward. So till recently, Michael Wetzel, who is a head of Sanskrit department in Harvard University and one of the staunch proponents of Aryan invasion theory, he always said that Dasharatnya Yuddha is a proof that Aryans started moving eastward. But rather it is other way around. Brijavasi Lal, who passed away in last month, one of the greatest archaeologists in India, he proved that Michael Wetzel interpreted the script wrongly, and it is in fact Sudas moved to west and he fought. So it is not like Aryans came from the northwestern part into India, rather Aryans were moving out maybe from India to other places. And that further proves that Aryan invasion theory or Aryan migration theory was not a fact. Also, there were a lot of excavations. There are a lot of excavations done in Sindhu Saraswati sites, and there are similarities found with uh, artifacts found on those sites like fire altars, Shivalingas, uh, Mayur Ghatas, etc., which are similar or which are believed to be similar to the religious beliefs of Aryas or Vedic religious beliefs. More and more people have now started believing, rather, Aryan invasion theory is mostly completely ruled out. Even Western scholars do not, most of the Western scholars refuse to accept it. Aryan migration theories are still being discussed, but more and more scholars are believing that Vedic culture is the indigenous Indian culture and it originated in India, and Aryans probably have migrated from India into other parts like Mittani or Iran, Kassite people, which are Keshi in Mahabharata, and that is called as out of India theory, which is a third theory which has been proposed by a lot of Indian scholars now, and which is now started taking the center stage. So with this, I will stop here. I mean, it's a very complicated topic. And before start of this lecture, I was not sure how to put it, and I'm still not sure whether I have put it in the right sequence and the right way, which can be understood by all of you. But still, I tried it. So if there are any questions, we can take the questions. Uh, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, I believe.
Yes, or you can raise hand also so that I can ask you to unmute. Yes, Vaidehi.
Thank you, Anandji. It was a very interesting session with a lot of. It's very heavy to take, but just getting my head around it. But one small question, slightly different from this: how soon can this come to the textbooks? Are we doing something about it? So I don't. It's not a direct question about the session, but that's the history we learned, right? Aryan invasion, Aryan migration, all of that.
Anand, you need to unmute yourself. I think you are unmuted.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, very good question. Actually, unfortunately, this rebuttal of Aryan invasion theory or the evidences have been discovered for maybe couple of decades at least, 1980s, 90s onwards. But still, a set of what do you call it? A set of self-proclaimed custodians of Indian history who claim authority of what is true and what is not. They never accepted this contradictory point of view, and still our textbooks still include this Aryan invasion and other things, right? So one thing is, uh, like Sucheta did, and she organized this lecture, and I got an opportunity to share what I learned to with maybe all of you. These things should be shared more and more widely so that people will start raising these questions on different forums. People will start raising their voices to get the history corrected so that our children get an opportunity to learn what is the fact. And it's not about Indians or pride or asmita. It's about the fact of the history. So that is one part of it. And second thing, we can sincerely hope and pray that elements or within the government, within the academia, uh, good sense will prevail in them, and they will take this up and probably do the corrections in the coming days. And with the new education policy that is being launched, more and more platforms will be available. For now, what I see is the platforms which are available are very restricted, and only few people, as I said, are custodians, have become custodians of what is to be taught or what is not to be taught, what is to be believed and what is not to be believed, and create narratives. Once this new education policy comes in, and of course with the power of social media, these things will are propagating, these things will propagate, more and more voices will raise, and I'm hopeful that this all these myths that are taught in the school syllabus.
So can I ask a sub question, Suchita?
Yes, Vaidehi.
Just to follow up on that, so there is no real formal way of doing this. That's what you are saying, isn't it?
Formal way of doing this is one way I can think of is we can start, nowadays on social media, we start campaigns, right? Or there are, some opinion making portals, etc.
Yeah.
Maybe these people can start these kind of campaigns, may make them viral, create some kind of wave or pressure on government. But with that, this is not going to easily happen. I know these debates will continue.
Yeah.
This is a hangover of 70 years.
Exactly. So that's the reason why I'm asking, because if there is so much evidence and it's so, of course, a lot of your work has gone into it, and that's why the way you put it is making it simple, look simple. I'm sure it's not that simple. But if there is so much evidence, I think there should be a formal way of
There should be, yes, definitely. It will happen.
will happen. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Thank you, Sucheta, for arranging, and thank you so much for
Thank
this
you.
session, sir. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Either it was too good or it was too heavy. I had to ask questions.
Yeah, I think it is just because it is so new, and yes, I agree.
Correct.
It is certainly heavy. So Maharajan,
Yeah, hello, sir.
yes.
Hello.
Sir, I actually wanted to, I actually noticed that, you had raised a point of, how Dr. Ambedkar, was against this theory, correct? So can you shed some more light on that perspective, please?
Sure. So, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, he wrote a famous essay, Who Were Shudras, right? And in that, he tried to analyze what was the origin of this overall, this aspect of untouchability, Shudras or casteism, etc. And in which actually he objectively had put forward a lot of things. One of those things is when he studied Rigveda, he could not find, or he rather did not find any evidence or any mention which suggests that Aryas came from outside. They had a fight with the indigenous people. They won over the indigenous people, and those were converted to Shudras. Rather, Ambedkar goes on to say that all the people, whether whether you call them Arya, Dravid, Brahman, Kshatriya, Shudra, whatever, they are all indigenous people. And the reason for this Ucha Nichata, reason for this casteism, reason for this identification of Shudras was not because of this invasion, but because of some religious beliefs and other aspects of, where some people wanted to grab the power, etc. Right? So his study was more from a social and political perspective, social perspective rather, to identify the root of this caste system, or identify the roots of how the term Shudras came into picture, and not to actually refute the Aryan invasion theory, or to put forward a scholarly view on Aryan invasion theory. But while doing his work, whatever came across, he mentioned all those facts in the essays that he has written, and in those he has mentioned these facts. And that is the only mention that we find where scholarly rebuttal has been made. Swami Vivekananda and Dayananda Saraswati also tried to rebut this, but that was from the philosophical perspective. They said that don't interpret Rigveda as in just a material way. It has a philosophical, deeper philosophical meaning. We have to understand that, right? But interpreting Rigveda in a material way and refuting the Aryan invasion theory was done by Dr. Ambedkar. That's why I mentioned it. In fact, scholars like Savarkar or even Lokmanya Tilak, they believed that Aryans came from outside. There is a famous book, Arctic Home of Vedas, by Lokmanya Tilak, who tried to prove that, Vedas were composed in somewhere in the Arctic region. Now, I just read a post. I mean, these were doing circles in just last few days, that Tilak, in later stage of his life, realized that that was a mistake, and he wrote the second part of it, but which was never published. I don't know what is the truth about it, but what was published in the public domain is Tilak believed that Vedas were composed in Arctic domain, Arctic region. So even the scholars, even the Hindutva scholars like Savarkar, at some point in time believed that Aryans came from outside and it was a superior culture. So that is a fact of it, and that is the irony, or that is the unfortunate thing, which actually helped or strengthen this Aryan invasion theory, and for last 70 years we have the hangover.
Thank you,
Is it
sir. Thank you so
also
much.
so? Anand, is it also because the evidences that we have had so far until Rakhi Gadi were mostly literature, archaeological, but not really the Rakhi Gadi thing where we have found the whole DNA for the first time probably, and that is something that is um,
No,
that
definitely.
was
So
lacking before.
definitely. So archaeological evidence definitely was lacking, and more evidences are being discovered, like Kalibangan Shivalingas are discovered, fire altars are discovered. So objects which can be related to religious rituals have been discovered in the later phases. Definitely, when I say Savarkar and Tilak, they mentioned this. They did not have all this material in the domain, but so do Ambedkar also. Okay, so that is so if you put them in one same single playing field, none of them had these evidences in front of them, and that's why uh, I call it as unfortunate. Probably nobody paid attention or nobody realized the nuisance that will be caused by this particular theory in the coming days, and the divide that will cause in within Indian society. There is a very good book by Rajiv Malhotra. Uh, I just forgot the name. I mean, I wanted to mention it. A recent book where he has given a lot of evidences as to how these theories were propagated, particularly in southern Indian states. How this theory of Dravidism was used for convergence and subservient or subserving or inflicting the inferiority sense on Indians or particularly Hindus. So he has compiled a lot of documentation from different sources across the world, including
Breaking
Macaulay,
India.
including a lot of other people.
Breaking India.
Huh? Breaking India.
Breaking India.
Yeah, Breaking India. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think we can stop here. So to end this session, I would again like to thank Anand for coming over and for sharing this new insight with all of us. Because I'm sure we all have heard about Aryan invasion or Aryan migration, but the way Anand actually described all of the aspects of it, the linguistic angle to it, and also the Vedic literature angle, the archaeology, the anthropology, and so many other things. So thank you very much, Anand, for accepting the invite and sharing this with us. And thank
Thank
you
you,
all
Sucheta.
for joining.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I would request all of you to keep reading about this subject. This is a very important aspect, and let's not forget this in all the halla gulla of all other subjects that we keep reading about how great our culture is, etc., etc. So these small things matter a lot, and spreading these small facts will matter a lot.
Thank you all. Thank you, Anand.
Thank you.